Hello everyone, I'm here in Pesaro, that at this time of the year seems to be the center of the world, at least the center of the musical world, because you know this is the town of Rossini and this is the town for the Rossini Opera Festival. I'm here in Via Mentana, this small road in Pesaro, because I'm gonna meet a person that you know perfectly well, because I need some information about Falstaff. Falstaff is the next production I'm going to stage this year in this strange festival. I'm in front of number 59 and I'm gonna ring the bell and let's see the person who lives here. Let's meet Mr. Luigi Ferrari.
Caro Roberto.
Ciao Luigi, come stai? Ci dovevo dare le mani perché social distancing. Ti dispiace, ti disturbo, so che oggi pomeriggio tu avevi molto da fare, però io ho delle urgenze, come tu sai.
E quindi parleremo del tuo Falstaff e in generale di Verdi.
Sì, perché sai che Rosetta quest'anno ha impostato tutto su Shakespeare, aveva impostato tutto su Shakespeare, poi il Covid ha cambiato un po' le carte in tavola, però è rimasto Falstaff, che è un po' un collegamento, infatti Waiting for Shakespeare in quel senso lì.
Certo, ma noi se ci diciamo tutta questa cosa in italiano,
dopo noi mettiamo i sottotitoli.
Ti dico, soprattutto credo che possa essere interessante parlare, oltre che di Shakespeare e di Verdi, di Boito.
Di Boito, fra l'altro, mi cogli nel segno, perché una delle caratteristiche di questo Falstaff è che la meraviglia del libretto, che è proprio di Boito, e quindi più ancora Verdi, genio assoluto, però
lo Shakespeare di Verdi non esisterebbe senza Boito.
Ecco, su questo secondo me potrebbe essere interessante che dire qualcosa anche poi per i nostri ascoltatori o i nostri spettatori che ci vedranno. Ci accomodiamo qui nel salotto. Qui cos'è che hai?
Quello è il risultato.
Ah, esultiamo. Prego.
Ma questo non è ripreso.
Sì, certo che è ripreso.
Sì, ma non fa parte.
Fa parte tutto.
Tutto fa parte.
Tutto fa brodo. Non parlare con Rosetta che non c'è in questo momento. Tu senti le voci.
Ok.
E tra l'altro forse per la comprensibilità del nostro incontro sarebbe meglio che ne parlassimo in inglese.
In English, please.
We should speak
the voice from everywhere.
We should speak
Allora, facciamo una
I will
cosa.
try.
Allora, facciamo così. Ci fermiamo, mandiamo una specie di sigla e poi riprendiamo.
Let's go.
Sigla. So, Falstaff. When I first opened the score, I was astonished by the words of Falstaff, and so I wondered how a composer like Verdi was fascinated by a theme like Shakespeare's Falstaff, or does this fascination comes from? Yes, we know that he wrote Otello.
Actually, the relationship between Verdi and Shakespeare is longer than one can imagine, according to the achievement of Falstaff. Verdi was interested in Shakespeare from the first years of his activity as a composer. And strangely to say, he was interested to 3 titles, which he never put in music. And those were Hamlet, The Tempest, and King Lear. King Lear, actually, at the end of his life, was a possible candidate for becoming an opera, but
he never faced it. I wish he wrote the Tempest, because the Tempest by Verdi would be very interesting.
Would be a good idea, but of course those 3 are the most open drama, the most problematic drama.
Talking about Shakespeare, about the plot.
Yes, written by Shakespeare, and probably I don't know how Verdi could resolve the problem of the relationship between his music and the text of Shakespeare, translated in Italian by who knows.
But how did he get to know Shakespeare or this title? Did he read it? Did he read it, or did he
actually, Shakespeare arrived in Italy quite late. You mean
he was not popular as a
not at all. And the first opera with a Shakespearean subject was Otello by Rossini.
Ah, yes, of course.
And that means we are at the in the second decade of the 19th century.
But Otello by Rossini or by Verdi Salsa, whoever wrote it, it's very different from the original.
Of course.
Because nobody knew Otello.
The tragedy, the Shakespeare tragedy was heavily
Changed
and manipulated. So it was a kind of misrepresentation of the Othello in Shakespearean
Was
way.
there a happy ending for Otello by Rossini? Is there or was it just uncredited? I don't remember.
Yes,
but
yes.
probably
Everything. Yes.
who stands up and sings a line. It's la cabaletta finale.
Yes. Anyway, Byron didn't like at all this transcription of the Shakespearean drama into the libretto by Verdi Salsa. Another thing we have to say is that Verdi approached Shakespeare in Macbeth, and that was a complete, full achievement. But then he never had another way to go close to Shakespeare until Ricordi decided to propose him to compose Otello with the poetry, because it wasn't a libretto, but it was a poetry written by Arrigo Boito.
Ah, Arrigo Boito. So now we have a link. Because
now we have a link, yes. Because the idea this poet had about Otello was something completely new for Verdi and for Italy. You know, Boito was a member of a movement, artistic movement, which raised in Milan and in general in Italy in the years between 65 and 75.
Very, very short time. Just
10-15 years. And this movement was called Scapigliatura. It was a kind of bohème, Italian bohème.
No, let's translate scapigliatura for our friends. Scapigliatura means people who doesn't have hair.
Yes.
Or who's uncombed.
The hair
means
is in a complete disorder.
So in a way, it can be a sort of evolution of romanticism.
Yes, actually it was a complete reaction against Romanticism and the kind of academy that the Romantic approach started to become.
Mm-hmm.
And young French in the 40s of 19th century, and then young Italians in the Milan, in the north of Italy, and then in entire Italy in the 60s of the 19th century, started to react to Romanticism with a completely new aesthetic. And they felt that the attention had to be concentrated on completely different themes, more connected to the poetic of the nothing, with the infinite,
yeah.
God and devil, the contrast between what you want and what we are forced to do, and all the contrast that exists in the life of man, aspiration to purity and reality of a life where there are strong
So I
passions.
can understand what you say. So in a way, Boito could be fascinated by Otello, but why Falstaff at this point? Otello and Falstaff have been signed by both by Boito.
That's the story. But just to start, I want to tell you why Boito was fascinated by Shakespeare. Actually, the relationship between Boito and Shakespeare is as long as the relationship between Verdi and Shakespeare. First of all, Boito had to do with Shakespeare when he composed the poetry, not libretto, for an Hamlet, which was put in music by another composer of those time, Franco Faccio, who later became one of the most acclaimed conductors in Italy and in Europe. He was a very famous conductor. And Franco Faccio was also a composer, and Boito too was a composer, actually experimented composer. He was a composer, one of the few composers. He and his friend Faccio were the two most famous composers in the scapigliatura movement.
So he was a multi-talented
Yes,
person. So actually now,
certainly,
yes,
a
because of course
multi-talented.
Boito wrote
Certainly a
Mephistopheles,
multi-talented,
and
yes,
probably
yes.
our friends know probably better Boito as a composer
Yes.
than as a poet or
Absolutely.
as a librettist.
And listen what Boito wrote about his Hamlet for Faccio. Melodrama is the great topicality of music, and Shakespeare is the great topicality of melodrama. If today melodrama dares to approach Shakespeare, it's a sure sign that today the melodrama is worthy of Shakespeare.
Uh-huh.
And this was the opinion of Boito as soon as he approached Shakespeare. Shakespeare, which was quite unknown in popular sense in Italy, and started to be known because the romantic poets and writers, above all Hugo in France, made him popular in French translation in Italy. So after Otello Rossini and after 3 other works Boito had written for the theater and for his lover, which was a very famous Italian actress, Eleonora Duse, he did a kind of rearrangement of 3 Shakespearean dramas. He did Antony and Cleopatra, he did Macbeth, and he did Romeo and Juliet
In spoken theater.
in spoken theater for Eleonora Duse.
Ah, that's great.
And then he felt himself ready to go to poetry for music and to give this poetry to Verdi.
So
and that was
he felt
the
that
origin of
there
the...
was a melodramatic side in Shakespeare's plays.
Yes, it arrived to, to get the intuition that there was a possibility for opera music to enter in good relationship with Shakespeare.
And just
That according to him, that music before the achievements of Verdi wasn't good enough to penetrate in the real essential, the real sense.
now that you tell me, so I understand that, for example, probably I don't know how many of them know Eleonora Duse, but I haven't seen Eleonora Duse, of course, alive. But probably our imagination about that period of the theater is to have a very melodramatic spoken theater.
Yes.
So I understand that way of acting, in a way, was
Yes.
closer than we expect.
The way of acting, yes, but one story is the way of acting on stage, and another story is the way you
Yeah, of course.
accord music and text.
That's
And the Boito's mind was a composer and poet mind.
yeah.
It was both. So the relationship between music and text was something that for him was extremely important. He himself wrote a very famous experimental opera, which was Mephistopheles, which got a great unsuccess at the beginning, at La Scala. Then it was recovered and not only accepted, but it got a triumph in Bologna.
This is the story of every opera. There is Traviata, Badambata,
many operas.
But I read,
and that was because Bologna was the most Wagnerian city in Italy, and that was they accepted the music of Boito, which was a revolutionary.
His taste as a composer was more Wagnerian than
Of
Italian.
Of course. So strange to say, but at one stage, Boito, which at the beginning was really extremely, how to say, close to the Verdi Romanticism. Verdi is the last romantic composer in Italy. Actually, he had this great intuition, and he understood that a new Verdi could be born from his own poetry.
When you say he, you mean
in Boito.
Boito. So Boito was the first engine.
Boito had to accept to write for Verdi, and Verdi had to accept to put in music
because there were two different
poetry.
words.
And Riccardi was the man who
managed to
put together.
Actually, Riccardi was more enlightened than we think. So
the
editor was probably the real person who could change the history of music.
But if you want to arrive finally to really understand Falstaff, as you can understand now, it's impossible without have a clear idea of what Verdi and Boito did together with Otello.
Otello. Talking about Otello. If I have to think of a scapigliatura opera, I don't think of Otello. Well, actually, probably I'm wrong.
Why you don't think about Otello?
Because Otello is, yes, it's a new opera. I mean, the language of Verdi has changed a lot. But I was not, maybe I insist, maybe I was wrong. I am wrong. But the libretto in Otello is very different from libretto in Falstaff. Falstaff sounds much more experimental, but probably I'm wrong. Because when you say that Boito influenced Verdi, it means that his verses are much more peculiar than the average verses that he ever got for his opera.
Yes, it's a kind of
a process.
A process the two men do together. They start to work together with Otello, and things continue to develop on themselves. And of course, Verdi is much more romantic in Otello than it will be in Falstaff. In Falstaff, Verdi is already almost a 20th century musician.
All of a sudden, because all of a sudden, because there were it's a completely
not suddenly, because things have a kind of gradual development. Yes, of course. Probably there is much less difference between the poetry of Boito, Otello, and Falstaff than the difference which is in the music between Otello and Falstaff.
Probably that's the main problem. This is another thing that maybe we can discuss later, but when I listen to an opera, the verses arrive to me not with the same crisp image that I would have reading them.
Yes.
Because the music is a medium that transforms things. But despite that, Falstaff arrives. I understand that the verses are much more peculiar. Probably Otello, the musical language in Otello is still a little bit more.
It's evolving. It's evolving. Yes.
Yeah. But talking
absolutely
about
possible. But
going back to
the very point is the way Verdi reacts to the poetry in Otello.
We know that his
which is very important because the Otello, which is designed and conceived by Boito, is a little bit far from the Shakespearean Othello.
In which ways?
First of all, as you know, the opera starts with
The storm.
a storm. And after the storm, Othello enters and gives an announcement of victory. The victory of Othello is not a real victory, because it was a storm which destroyed the fleet of the Turks, not a battle. So he enters and he say, rejoice, esultate, l'orgoglio musulmano sepolto è in mar, nostra e del cielo e gloria, dopo l'armi lo vinse l'uragano. Rejoice, Muslim pride is buried in the sea. Glory is ours and heaven's. After the weapons, which didn't happen actually, the hurricane won him, the storm won him. So
He was honest.
he was certainly honest, but actually is not a real winner. So the first presentation of this Othello, of course, Boito completely cancels the first act of Shakespeare, and he starts from the beginning of the second. But from this point, Othello is is offered to the attention of the listener, not only as a general, but as an old general. Othello is an old man. And this is a very important point, because in the second act of the opera, during the very famous love duet between Othello and Desdemona, Boito insists on this point and tries to elongate the perspective of the story of Othello. It's like he wanted to let understand the audience that Othello, this old general, has a long story behind him. And
So there is also a big gap between the age, how old is he, and
yes, there is a gap.
there is a gap.
I don't
We don't know
how big
also
he is,
depends.
but certainly he's not a young lover.
Yeah.
Desdemona says to Othello, you remember when you narrated your exile life and the proud events and your long sorrows. So Desdemona starts to elongate this perspective. And then Othello, and you loved me for my misfortunes, and I loved you for your pity. Misfortunes and pity apparently are the reasons of their love, not sex, not passion. And then again start to say, I'm now descending the valley of life. So he clearly announces to the audience, because Desdemona knows very well that he is not any young lover. And that's a very important point, because around this impossibility and around this impotence, the drama of Boito's Othello is built.
More than in Shakespeare, or do you think this theme is present also in Shakespeare?
In Shakespeare, this theme is less, on my opinion, I give you just my opinion. I'm not an expert Shakespearean, but I don't suspect that this point is so heavily underlined in Shakespeare. Certainly it is in Boito. And certainly Verdi
Probably because at that age it was not
felt something.
Yeah, probably it felt that
Of
it was
course,
a part of his life.
of course. It's something which starts to make Verdi it puts good vibrations in Verdi. Verdi start to feel something in common between himself and this old warrior. Verdi too was an old warrior.
Yeah, of course.
He had a very hard fight. He had to fight very hardly at the beginning of his life to conquer the glory.
And so the traditional idea that the problem with Otello is being different, is being black, is being different that way is less interesting or less important than
this is
than
quite unimportant already in Shakespeare. Here it becomes almost nothing. He says, of course, he knows but he's an old soldier, an old man. This is more important than the fact that he knows to be black. That was very important in the source where Shakespeare went yes,
talk what source is
the original source of the Shakespearean drama, but not so important in Shakespeare and almost nothing. The very point, of my opinion, in Otello is that he is quite an old man, and his jealousy is not a jealousy of a man who I can kill my competitor. I can beat him with my personal virtues or other. His one possibility is to accept what happens, and this is unfortunately for Desdemona, to destroy
because he's
the
destroying
object
himself.
of his life. Yes,
More than
first Desdemona and then himself. Actually, he is the one way to solve the problem is to destroy the object of his love, because he cannot. He's persuaded that he cannot afford.
This point is very interesting because it gives a new light to what we are used as opera goers to the normal subject like Otello. So we think Otello is black, she's white. Well, actually, I've never seen a portrayal of Otello as an old man. Well, actually, you're right, because in the duet, that duet is very clear in a way, if I understood the words, of course, because that's the main problem. So maybe for a non-Italian speaker, he has the subtitles, so he can read what they're saying better than what I do being Italian.
Yes, but this is said by Otello himself.
Yeah, of course.
Listen, perhaps because I do not set the deceptions of a witty love. Perhaps because I am descending into the valley of the years, I told that. Perhaps, this is the third point, because I have this dark color on my face. She is lost and I am mocked. But the color of the face is the third point.
Just the third point.
For Boito. This is very interesting.
And just another curiosity, we know that this is a triangle. We have Otello, we have Desdemona, but of course we have Iago. Iago comes from Shakespeare, of course.
Comes from Shakespeare, and on my opinion, which is very different from other people, he's just an engine of the action. He's
not the main character, as somebody says.
He's a very important character, but as far as the action is concerned, he's an engine.
But this
as far as the character is concerned, this is very important. Actually, the content, the philosophical content, Boito put in his poetry, actually is on Iago. So Iago is the character who, who takes the philosophical context of the libretto. Typical content of scapigliatura. The contrast between the dark and the light, demon and God, purity and sin.
That takes us to
And this
the
the great. Sorry.
That takes out to
Yeah. And also il credo.
Il credo, certo.
Il credo, the
That's
creed
a
by Iago.
declaration. This is sort
Yes.
of a manifesto.
It's a declaration. It becomes particularly strong when he says, I'm looking for the English. E poi, very final verse, la morte è il nulla e vecchia fola il cielo. And then, death is nothingness, and an old lie is heaven. And this is the final point that Iago sends to us listeners as a message.
So just to clarify, this arrives at the end of the credo. That is the aria by Iago. So it's the moment in which we understand exactly what he thinks.
Yes, because but in this how to say in this character which is come si dice il cattivo,
The villain.
The villain is the villain, actually.
But he's the winner.
Yes.
Because in a way, this is a struggle between the nothingness he is proclaiming here. Vecchia fuori il cielo, the heaven is not is not true. But the beginning of the opera, you say, it begins with the heaven intervention. So in a way, there is a contrast. But by the end, he is true.
It's true.
So this is very pessimistic.
Yeah, could be. Yes, actually, it's very pessimistic, and this is why I think so. You must go through Otello to understand Falstaff, because this kind of pessimism, which is expressed by Iago in Otello, and actually it's quite interesting. I tell you one thing: exactly the same phrase, exactly the same verse, is also in another poetry written by Boito for another composer, Ponchielli, in another opera which is quite famous because of Danza delle Ore, which is La Gioconda. In La Gioconda by Ponchielli, the villain, which is Alvise, baritone, in a point says exactly the same thing. And then death is nothingness and an old lie is heaven.
A self-borrowing.
Yes, there is a self-borrowing Boito does of one verse from an opera to another, and obviously a verse which is very close to his scapigliato, member of scapigliatura, philosophy.
So this is Otello, and of course Otello is very interesting, but of course I came here to know something about Falstaff.
Yes.
Now the idea that Boito is so important changes the perspective. Now I understand why the words are so important. And apparently these two cases, Otello and Falstaff, are the first time maybe that Verdi has a relationship with such an important poet. All the other librettists are very important for Verdi, but not as important.
Definitely, this is the more important relationship between Verdi and one of the.
And how we come to Falstaff? Now that we know that actually Otello is a tragedy, Falstaff is a comedy or something, and probably not exactly the cup of tea for
Verdi. I would say it's a philosophical comedy.
It's a philosophical comedy.
In my opinion, yes, but I want to show you something. Let's go.
So that was this is Otello. So I need Falstaff.
We go for Falstaff.
So, this is the Falstaff.
Yes.
I recognize it.
This is the score of Falstaff.
The original one, the manuscript. I recall.
Not really, but anyway, We need it just to show you one point. And this point is at the very end of the opera.
So we can skip all the rest.
We can skip all the rest and go straight to the very final point. Because since you are interested in knowing which relationship exists between Otello and Falstaff according to Boito, the point is that both of them are two old warriors in front of their end.
Because also Falstaff is old.
That's the point. The difference is obvious. Otello is a character created by Shakespeare in a play. Falstaff is a character selected by Boito from different Shakespeare plays.
Because we don't have a play called Falstaff.
Yes,
we have
of course.
different.
Is a character existing in different
But
points.
it's a recurring character because it was a recurring character. It was
It's
a sort of a hero.
It was in Henry IV, the first and second part. It is in Merry Widow of Windsor.
And he keeps the same characteristic as a character. I mean, he's always that Falstaff for Shakespeare.
Of course.
Here,
It changes slightly. Also, it reappears after in a previous drama is a given as a dead, and then he reappears. But that's another point because the Queen was very fond of this character. But this is not our story. Anyway, the point is that the different point where Falstaff appears in Shakespeare are, for Boito, like tiles of a mosaic. And he, like an expert mosaicist, takes pieces of this and that and recreates the character in the story of his own Falstaff for Verdi. And that's the point. So he is in position to put together a character with independent from Shakespeare, as much to do with the old Otello than in Shakespeare, where the two characters has almost nothing to do. And that probably is something which is very interesting for Verdi, because Verdi had, we already said that, Verdi had probably a kind of sympathy for Otello because he, saw in him something which is also
something belonging to
his own position in life. An old warrior, a winner but old. And now there is another character of soldier. Of course, there is a big difference between the character of Falstaff as a warrior and Otello as a warrior. Falstaff is a kind of it comes from the very old character, the Latin character of the Latin comedy Miles Gloriosus, which is the arrogant, the boaster, braggart soldier. So very different from Otello, but he himself has to confront the last part of his life with the problems connected with this particular moment of the life of a man, and he reacts to that.
So still, the age is the central point of Falstaff.
Yes.
So it's not
in my opinion.
No, you're right. The guts of Falstaff is in a way the black collar of Otello. It's a secondary character.
Of course. And Otello feels himself not longer ready to the love battle. And Falstaff would like again to afford this particular sport, but
He
of
never
course-
gets to the point, so we don't know if he was able or not
Yes.
to achieve
actually,
the point.
exactly. So, but what is the very point? The very point of the entire story is here, according to Boito, is here at the very end, when the story is finished, and the 10 characters all together appear on stage and have to tell what is the moral,
The moral.
the final moral of the play. And the final moral is tutto nel mondo è burla. Everything in the world is a joke. And that's the very point, which probably, I don't know, but which is extremely attractive for Verdi, because from the end of the play, it projects its light on the entire opera.
Backward, or entire opera.
Yes, the entire opera, the entire Falstaff.
Yeah.
It's like if you don't the story, the plot is finally solved, but also you can understand really the reason of everything which has been performed before that. And the reason is unfortunately quite simple. The reason is that nothing
exists, nothing counts.
Nothing
So
counts.
it's a pessimistic, another pessimistic ending. Well, actually, we think that this finale is just a joyful, jolly way to end a big joke, but actually it discovers
Yes.
the boiling nothingness that
Yes.
Boito has always tried
So-
to.
Othello, death is nothingness. Falstaff, life is nothingness.
So it's even it's getting worse and worse.
It's getting worse. It's getting worse. So, the pessimistic philosophy, which is underscored behind the words, is in a way by Verdi made even more efficient, ecastic. I don't know if it is.
Let's say casting, then we can underline afterwards. We can make a subtitle.
It's more efficient under the point of musical view, and the point of view of the music, because how Verdi offers these words to the audience, using a typical ancient tool of music.
Musically speaking, you mean?
Yes, and this ancient tool is the fugue.
Ah, yes.
It creates a fugue, enormous, a colossal fugue, 10 voices.
The architecture of the fugue is
It's an
fantastic.
enormous fugue. But
It's just structural.
yeah, what is the architecture of fugue?
Just-
Since you speak about that, is one subject,
That is repeated.
one counter subject. So do two little things of something which work together and develop and, how to say, like a foam,
Yeah.
became more and more and more, but it's always foam. And like, a soft bubble.
Crescendo rossiniano that
Of
leads
course,
to
it's
nothing.
something which becomes more and more like hot, like iron, and to gray, to red, to orange, to white. When the hot
Yeah.
is enormous, so it's white, and at the end, when this soft bubble is
Explodes.
finished, then you can
And then everything collapses.
everything collapses, disappear, and the fugue is finished.
So it's not a volcano, it's just a soap
it's just a
bubble.
fantastic, colorful soft bubble. This is the fugue, and it's very interesting that Verdi decided to select a fugue as a something which can express in the best way this point: life is nothing. So you can build everything. The form can become as big as you want, but at the end of the story, it will be just form. So nothing.
So, according to what you said before, this finale, that actually is not the full opera, but is just the signature, the ending, the last thing that people takes home with them, is an ancient way to write music. But actually, it's used by Verdi and by Boito, both in each of them in their own department, musically and words, are talking about something completely new.
Yeah. The idea of a formula like a fugue is, which is put here, is a way Verdi selects as a genius to adhere perfectly to the idea of Boito, poetry and music. Boito had the way to write many years before Falstaff. His own idea of the opera, and the first point is that for him is that the opera had to abandon the formula and become something which had to do with the form. So from formula, the ancient opera, to the form.
But Verdi was the king of formulas in a way, because
he has been involved in formulas in the first part of his activity as a composer, but then he too understood that
he needed
opera
to
had
develop, to grow.
develop. And certainly there is a complete adherence of the music to the text in Falstaff, and that means that Verdi himself decides to go towards the form. But another point, Verdi had already moved toward this point before Falstaff. But this is the point of the goal, the final goal of his achievement. And strange to say, he used to have the perfect form of his composition. He select a formula. He put again a formula in this place, which is the fugue. But it's a fantastic idea, because the fugue is not part of the opera normally. Exactly as a sonnet is not part of the text. But Boito used a sonetto in the text of the libretto, the famous aria by Fenton. And
Sonetto that takes us back to Shakespeare. Or is it an Italian sonetto?
The sonetto, there are different kind of sonetto. The Shakespearean sonetto was different as a structure: 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 2 verses. Italian sonetto was 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 3. Actually, 2 quartets and 2 triplets. But and Boito used an Italian sonetto, but the fact that Boito too introduced a formula in the form, and Verdi at the end does its own part, putting a formula in the form, which is very interesting.
Verdi was too experienced as a composer to even think that he could use Boito not only as a poet or a librettist, but also as a suggestion to write music. But at this point, it means that the meeting between Verdi and Boito has made that sprinkle, that spring that made this completely different. With another librettist, Falstaff wouldn't be this way.
We couldn't imagine another Falstaff, of course without Verdi, but neither without Boito. The magic of this absolute masterpiece, which is Falstaff, depends on both of them. And this is the very important point. You too, as a producer and as a director,
have a responsibility now.
Yeah, and you too can assume that the very story of Falstaff is the story of a meeting between two geniuses.
Yeah.
And it's
very
a good
interesting.
point to close it, to start.
Just because I think we have to go for the coffee and it's time to go. But Luigi, you have been an artistic director, not only in Wexford, but you have dealt with operas everywhere, so you know opera very well. Now you are chairman at the Institute of Verdi Studies, so take your own responsibilities, because now in front of the world you will have to answer to this final question. If you have to give the right acknowledgement to the real author of Falstaff, would you rate Falstaff more by Verdi or now pay attention because you can be fired?
I would certainly share the responsibility of this achievement.
Between Boito
Between
and
the two. I cannot tell you how much
is
one and how much
one.
is the other. But certainly, I'm sure that we should assume that the weight of the Boito's contribution to this mastership is much bigger than the average idea about that.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much, Luigi. I think you don't want to play for us the final fugue.
Not completely.
Just 2 notes, because this is very difficult to be played.
Yes.
But anyway, in the piano reduction is not even easier than for the orchestra and for the singers as well.
The beginning it is quite easy.
So everything in the world is just a joke. Okay, so everything in the world is just a joke.
Just a
this
joke.
was quite serious, but talking about serious things, our Wexford audience is waiting for our final hello.
So, warmest wishes for this festival and ciao a tutti quanti gli amici di Wexford.
Ciao, see you in few time. I don't really remember when we are going to perform this thing, but anyway, thank you very much. Grazie mille Gigi. Scusami, adesso vado a prendere il caffè perché Alessandra sta aspettando. Tu rimani qui.
Io rimango qui.
Ciao, ciao Gigi, grazie. Addio.
Ciao ciao.
Ciao.